The logic of pessimism moves through three refusals: a no saying to the worst, refuse of the world for us, or Schopenhauer's tears; a yes saying to the worst, refuse of the world in itself, or the Nietzsche's laughter; and a no saying to the for us and in itself, a double refusal, or Sioran's sleep. Crying, laughing, sleeping, what other responses are adequate to a life that is so indifferent? Those are the words of Eugene Thacker that welcome you into this episode of Thunderdome Metal Reviews. In his book, I can't remember the title of, but that's okay. But he should have got a writing credit. He very well might have on this At the Gates album, The Nightmare of Being, an album picked by my compatriot and friend, Dr. David Pizzo, who is here with us, as well as Tracy, Master of Slaughter Newport. Gentlemen, how are you doing?
I am ready to talk about the actual origin of the Gothenburg sound. Actual Gothenburg, not Gothenburg adjacent.
Yes.
Not one of those posers from a different part of Sweden. And I've listened to this band for a long time, since Tracy was in diapers. How are you, Tracy?
I wasn't in diapers when Slaughter to Soul came out. I was.
1995. Well, maybe you were for different reasons.
7.
Yeah, how old were you? I mean, that would be a lot of diapers, I admit.
That
Fine.
would be,
I was still young.
It's
I didn't
true.
know what metal was then yet. I was still
You didn't have me as a parent.
true. I didn't have you as a parent,
Ah.
and I was still young and ignorant about the world,
How you doing
for
tonight?
better or for worse. Put the night that ends with At the Gates.
yeah, man. Why did you choose this album?
Because it's fucking badass. Okay, I didn't know that. I just saw At the Gates and I was like, oh snap, At the Gates. Because I have listened to them. I've been on the ride since the mid-90s. So I admit I came in at Slaughter of the Soul and went backwards, into the earlier sort of more almost tech death stuff. And I really dug them and I was so into them. And then they broke up and I was like, well, shit. So they disappeared from 96 until 2010. Then got an album out in 2014, but I missed the reboot. I didn't actually know they'd reformed until I was looking earlier in the summer to put stuff on the schedule. And I was like, oh shit, At the Gates came, it's like a thing again. And I learned there were 3 other albums, all 3 of which I've listened to now because I'm an overachiever and I wanted context, man. But I was just very pumped to see that they were still making music. And I love the Gothenburg sound. And I guess future me knew that the other 2 albums we were listening to this week were soporific nonsense. So I needed a little bit of some adrenaline. So way to go, future me, on making me pick something that has some swing to it. So yeah, I love At the Gates, and I was really here for this pretty much from start to finish. I'll just spoil it. So that's my rave review of my 26-year relationship with At the Gates.
In
That
my
broke
defense,
up for a while because they're sick. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, in my defense, for my soporific pick this week, I gave you plenty of warning. It was going to be that, and you probably weren't going to like it.
You did. It's okay. And I kind of liked it, but
I would say
it
that
wasn't this.
lyrical concept that this is not that far from the last or the 2 other albums that we did. Maybe not The Apocalypse Shouldn't Rider.
I was about to be like, they had lyrical concepts to it? What?
But King Woman, I would say that conceptually these albums are fairly close together. This is, although admittedly, much more up-tempo. So yeah.
I agree. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was simply going to say that I think they all fit together, not just lyrically, but all of them in their own way are experimental. I just think this was an experiment that worked. Because this is very experimental compared to their early shit, as I'm sure we're going to get into. Like solos happen on here. So this album goes some weird places, but you're going to tell us about it, and I'm going to shut the hell up.
A little bit. It is A Nightmare of Being, released on July 2nd, 2021. 5th studio album overall. Recorded in 3 different studios in Sweden. Studio Gröndal, where the drums were recorded. Sonic Train Studio, where the guitars and bass were recorded. And notice that I capitalized bass because I was a bassist. And Welfare Sounds, where they recorded vocals. It is on Century Media. The mixers were Jens Bolgren, who recorded the drums, and is also the overall producer for this. Andy LaRocque, who did the guitars and bass, and Pierre Stolberg, who I apologize if I fucked up your name, who did the vocals, has a runtime of 45 minutes and 37 seconds. The band is Thomas Lindberg on vocals, Martin Larson on guitars, Jonas Stahlhammer on guitars, Jonas Bjorler on bass, and Adrian Erlandson on drums, and a Devin Townsend-esque amount of guest musicians who came in, played various orchestral instruments, saxophone, as David mentioned. Andy LaRocque laid down a badass, probably honestly the best guitar solo on the entire album on one of the songs. And so, yeah, you can look those up yourself because there are literally like 20 to 30 guest musicians on this.
Yeah, and it's Lindberg with a G.
Oh, not bad.
No, it's a lot of Swedish to type out, dude. I think they would forgive us. He was a social studies teacher for a good while. I think still is, so that made me very happy.
He's David's role model
there's
now.
He's my role model. There's a fair amount of continuity. I mean, the bassist, drummer, and singer are the same on all of these albums, despite the pause. There's some guitar lineup changes, which I guess we'll talk about in a second, that may or may not have hurt them. But for, there's some of these bands we listen to that barely have an original person in them.
Yeah.
Besides the one.
So exactly. It's Burton C. Bell. So anyway, I was super here for this because, I loved Slaughter of the Soul. Which was sort of the progenitor of the Gothenburg sound. It's, many people argue, some of the first melodic death metal, or at least some of the first really popular within melodic death metal. One of the things I like with this album has a somewhat different sound from them. That doesn't surprise me. I went backwards and listened to the 2014 and 2018 releases. The 2014 release is like about magical realism, and they like read a bunch of, Gabriel Maria Marquez, and that album is intense and very strange, but I think very cool. This album is the first one without Bjorler, the guitarist. So they lost. Actually, no, I think the last one didn't have him either. But he used to write most of the music, so that potentially was a real blow. Like the main songwriter, everything up until 2014 left. So I feel like they've moved. There's definitely still some death metal and thrash here, but there was also, I felt like, a bit of doom. There's a lot of stuff in here that reminded me of Paradise Lost. I feel like they were, to a certain degree, and I know this is about to sound like an oxymoron, you're both gonna make fun of me, but doom at thrash or near thrash tempos, because I feel like the chord structures and some of the sounds are not really, I love Onslaught and Slayer, but there's not a whole lot of experimentation there, like in terms of instrumentation, right? So, or the textures they're creating. So there were a lot of Paradise Lost-esque textures, I felt like. This album also, I was really pleased. They're very good at letting things breathe. Not to the degree that you're waiting 10 minutes for them to start singing, but they, I'm not sure Lindberg is the best singer. I don't know if you'd argue he was the best singer. I mean, in some ways, he's maybe an acquired taste, a bit like, the singer of Carcass.
He has a very distinct voice.
He does.
Well. I think even for his style that he sings, it's distinct.
He's doing death metal with a hardcore bark.
Yeah, like he reminds me honestly of Jamie Johnston in that sense of like close to him.
The
and
phrasing
vocals.
is very much that. Yeah, I like the sound of his voice a little bit better than Jamie's, but yeah.
I will say now that you mentioned that does make a lot of sense. Is the death metal played at a thrash tempo, or not death metal, doom metal played at a thrash tempo, and a lot of it, and that makes sense in the way this album sounded and how it came about, like how I took it. And there were moments in here also when they have like, here's the flute and here's the saxophone that I really dug that they brought those
totally did.
They kind of added a little more feel to it, that filled parts that might have not that would have been felt empty if they wouldn't have had those parts in there.
There is a term, and I don't know.
I agree.
I've never heard it associated with this band. I've actually only heard it associated with In Minor, one of Phil Anselmo's side projects, but depression core. And I think that this really fits this because you're right. It is doom metal played at a thrash tempo, and the doom really comes in with the lyrical style and content. And I mean, if you read the lyrics or if you pay it, I mean, his bark is a death metal bark, but you can easily understand it. It's not like some vocalists where you
agreed.
But so yeah, if you pay attention to this, it's a pretty damn dark album. So
It is. I mean, the cover art is basically the Anthropocene. They're like sitting there on shore watching their own city fucking burn, and I was listening to this, of course, as half the West Coast burns down.
yeah,
Like this album, I feel like is really grappling with that in a way that I guess we're going to see more and more of.
The week that climate change report that came out and said we're basically all fucked by 2050.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's it. And
in some ways,
goes to the very good.
No, all I was going to say is in some ways it really reminds me of was it Moonspell that we did an album last year that was kind of the same thing where it was like their city drowning. Yeah.
Who did you say?
Yeah, we did that in Moonspell, the Portuguese band.
Gotcha. Yeah.
That was this calendar year, but last Thunderdome year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a different calendar.
It was.
We are the church after all, so we get to have our own calendar.
Indeed.
It's the
Tresorian calendar.
I was trying to think of a name to fit all of us in there together. I wasn't gonna call it Tresorian.
You're the schedule keeper.
It's Tresorian. I mean, it's like Gregorian. Yeah, exactly. Freaking, you were Copernicus commissioned to do this, but instead you discover the sun's in the middle.
Well,
what's your relationship with ethics?
I am now officially naming the Google Doc for our calendar the Tresorian calendar.
That works for me.
Do it. Works for me. So Tracy, I'm sorry to back up because I just started spewing because I love them. What is your relationship with this band? Because you listen to so much more metal than me or even Ben. I'm sure you were like, oh, I had that in place 800 on my best of 2018. Yeah, I see you even have the data to look it up. Tracy, I love you. You're so weird.
So
I got a spreadsheet that tells me.
I'd actually, at the beginning of 2021, I'd actually listened to Slaughter of the Soul. Like I'd got a couple listens into that. And let me see where.
That album did not have saxophone solos.
Well, it did not. I gave that one a high B.
It did not. So
if I was to put it on a rating right now, I gave it a high B. I mean, hey, it's a high B.
I'm just kidding, but for real.
Yeah, and so like I like that one enough for me to want to come back to it later on again. The 2018 album though, I don't think I latched onto that one as much. I remember hearing it. So yeah, To Drink from the Nightfall, the night itself. I remember hearing it, but I don't think I actually globbed onto it like I did Slaughter of the Soul. But also, that was still early in my. I muted myself. I'm just going to gorge metal until I can't no more, and I hadn't quite developed the iocane powder that I have now of death metal, melodic death metal, and etc., and to some extent industrial groove.
Yeah, I had listened to them in the 90s, but honestly, I hadn't noticed that they had retired, and there wasn't any more albums coming out, and I was like, oh, whatever. And I didn't know that they had reformed, so this was a pleasant surprise for me.
Yeah, they've had to get through some shit, like losing Anders Björler. That's brutal. Like he really did write a lot. I mean, it'd be like losing Steve Harris. Yeah. Like he really was writing a lot of the music for them. I think that 2014 album, Tracy, is better than the 2018. The magical realism one. One, Bjorler's still there, and two, they've just got a lot of energy. They're like, I've been a fucking social studies teacher, but now I'm going to make death metal again.
Yeah, and it's that revival album. Like they came back and they're ready to go and
totally ready to work.
And it also lays to that part. You replace the main songwriter. Here's your first album, and they have to kind of relearn what they're doing, playing as a band. And this is that second go at it.
Exactly.
I've only found really, I don't off the top of my head, one album to where the main songwriters departed prior to it being written, and it was a good album. And that was Soul Works, Living Infinite.
Again, on the Soilwork train tonight.
That's a fantastic fucking album. We'll mention it.
It is. and I feel like At the Gates died so they could live. Right, in terms of them falling away, because so much of the music you love, Tracy, them and Scar Symmetry, who I love too, thank you,
Yeah.
I knew Soilwork, but I didn't know Scottish Cemetery before the Tracy era. They would exist without this. I feel like I stand by that,
I
even
think
if
they would
maybe
too.
he doesn't do them.
Like I think these guys laid the bedrock, and you also saw that
Mhm.
with Carcass and Arch Enemy, even to an extent,
Indeed.
and Children of Bodom, who we'll be looking at in the near future, that they laid the groundwork for the sound of a lot of these bands I enjoy.
Mhm.
Oh yeah,
So it's
well,
kind-
on the American side too, they were very influential because I don't think you get the Shadows Fall and the Kill Switch Engage and some of that either.
I don't
Some
either.
of those are coming out at around the same time, so Divergent, Evolution, and all that. But I do think that they influenced each other quite a bit.
yeah, it's almost
they
a.
admit it in many cases.
I was gonna say it's almost a wheel moment. Then that, like, because they took that break after '95, was it? Like
Six.
Yes,
they had a
96.
couple compilation releases in there, but they didn't have actual album releases.
Yeah.
And then you have like Shadows Fall and all these bands coming out in the late '90s and stuff. Like, well, we're tired of waiting for a new At the Gates album, so we'll make our own.
Yeah, they've Shadows Fall. Those people, they've admitted absolutely they were influenced by the Gothenburg sound.
Yeah,
I think it did transpose over into metalcore. That was sort of the leap over point. But this album is not metalcore. This album has saxophones and flutes, which I know I dinged the last album we reviewed because I wanted to choke it. But here I think it works. I think it works in this case. I even think sometimes strings are fucking cheesy. Because I feel like often people will throw in some violin, like let's Dimmu Borgir this shit, but they don't throw in viola or cello, any of the low strings, and it just sounds like a damn keyboard. So, like, it's not even just adding some instrumentation makes it good. Like, I'm here for that, but they did it successfully, and it's like well mixed. There's like the low end. I feel like this is a case where that, and I don't always feel that way. Again, that last album pissed me off, the Apocalypse and Reiter, but this one I feel like they nailed it.
I do too. I think a lot of it too. This is not them going in and free-forming everything without having anything written and just coming up with what they come up with. These are written songs, so there's a whole lot more structure. And I agree with you. That jazz, well, not jazz, that saxophone, it reminded me of jazz. Solo that's on this album, beautiful. Fit the song so well. So good. Yeah.
you reminded me in that extent of some of the Rivers of Nihil, which I know Ben wasn't the biggest fan of, but it was nice to hear. I like hearing like those oddball, like orchestral instruments come in moments of metal where you don't really expect them because it's not like traditionally aligned with like the symphonic aspect of it.
It's always a good idea. It's not always executed well. And I think Rivers of Nihil is okay. I just didn't think, I thought they were a little excessive in it, but it's used so sparingly here that it really, sometimes a little bit goes a long way. So we talk about some songs?
Yeah.
I think me or Ben needs to go before David just everything on it.
I'll go first, and then Tracy, you can follow up. Spectre of Extinction is a fantastic opening track. That was very well done, and that's the one that Andy LaRocque lays down the solo on. It's so fucking good. Paradox is a pretty decent follow-up. Garden of Ceres, which is the one that has the saxophone on, is awesome. Perhaps my favorite track on there. Cult of Salvation is pretty good. Cosmic Pessimism, which is the name of the Eugene Thacker book that I quoted at the beginning and that I couldn't remember the name of. Love that song a whole lot. And one of the cool things about that, and I didn't check the liner notes because I didn't have a physical copy to look at to see if they gave a writing credit to Eugene, but it almost felt like they were just reading passages from the book. I've got it, but it's been a while since I've read it, and I just didn't double check. And Eternal Winter of Reason, I think, is a fairly strong closer. The other songs are not bad by any stretch, but those are the ones that stood out to me.
Like Ben, I think Spectre of Extinction is a great opener. I really enjoy that. Really sets the stage for the album. I think The Nightmare Being is a good title track. Garden of Cyrus I enjoyed the saxophone, and I think it's I really enjoyed Touched by the White Hands of Death and The Fall into Time and Cult of Salvation. That 1, 2, 3 there in the middle, I really enjoyed. I'm not the biggest fan of the back three as Ben is though.
kind of like them all. No, let's see. So Spectre of Extinction, I really like the Metallica-esque acoustic intro. That's what that reminded me of, that beginning. And it's, of course, Anthropocene themed. It really lets you know right away we're all going to die. And there's that kick-ass riff with all the discordance. Paradox, I think, is a great follow-up, also a great riff. I think, interestingly, I think the Nightmare of Being is almost the weakest track on here. It's not a bad track, exactly as Ben said. It's, even the weaker tracks are just sort of okay, but it's just, it wasn't my favorite. I freaking love Garden of Cyrus. And I'm not always here for this. It's a little bit down-tempo, and sometimes saxophone solos, it's just 280s. Unless it's Blade Runner, which is good 80s. I don't know. Anyway, here it was very successful, and I was fucking here for it. It also sounded a bit like Paradise Lost to me. This is one of the tracks that really did. I like Tracy loved the flutes and chimes in Touch for the White Hands of Death. It had a sort of fantasy feel. And then that horror score that is super fucking menacing. And then thrash, bam, it's happening. I love that song. Fallen in Time has that sort of sci-fi soundscape thing going on, and then lonely guitar and timpanis. So it, like Tracy, I know Tracy lives for this stuff. Sometimes I love it, sometimes I don't, but here they just nail it in song after song after song. I did like Abstract Enthroned, I guess, a bit more than Tracy, because it's sort of death metal-esque, and there's cellos. And then Cosmic Pessimism, I love that heavy groove acoustic thing they do, which was also a tiny bit roots almost. And the closer, I don't think it's quite as good as some of the other songs, but it is okay. It is a nice sort of last gut punch, and it has a great riff in it. So there's really not a bad song on here. I'd say really only maybe Nightmare of Being and maybe Cult of Salvation are a little weaker. Maybe Eternal Lair of Reason. But man, there's a lot of good songs on here. And as an album, I feel like it flows and coheres quite well. 45 minutes is perfect. I felt that more strongly than ever after that 78-minute monstrosity I listened to before this.
Well, that's interesting because I actually had to change, because I normally listen to them in the order that I record them, just so I can have that mental in my head when I listen to them.
Yeah.
But I had to move this one because I was catching myself as it would go from the Apocalypse Richter to this, that final track in the Apocalypse Richter sounds similar enough to this that it took me about 2 songs in this go, it's a different album, for me to make that mental disconnect in it.
After I listened to this album, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
After I'd listened to this album 2 or 3 times, I got to where I would take this album in chunks instead of listening to it all at one time. Because there's quite a bit of difference stylistically as to what the instrumentation and everything is, but they're all still that melodic death metal, and there was a bit of sameness to it that I had to step away from every now and again.
I can see that. I messed up at putting them on my playlist. So I was listening to Reiter, then King Woman, then this. So Tracy, I didn't have any of that. I had albums that made me want to be unconscious or dead. And then suddenly, like, At the Gates rode in like the cavalry. And here's an actual riff that's going somewhere. So I had like 2 very slow, soporific, Quaalude-esque albums, and then this. So I think I have a higher tolerance maybe than Ben if that sort of 10 songs that are slightly kind of the same space, because I like other melodic death metal, which I admit there's a bit of that happening. I love Soilwork and I love Scar Symmetry, but I can see what Ben is saying. There's not some of the variation you get with some of the things that Ben is into. That's what I'll say. Those weird doomy things.
There's other things that it's just personal preference, because a lot of the thrash I listen to is also kind of thrash the entire way through, and it doesn't bother me. But just for this one, it did. I do think that it might have changed your listening experience if you had listened, because I do the same thing Tracy does. I listen to these in order just because I'm lazy, and I just look them up, and that's how I do them. I think that might have changed your listening experience. Maybe a little bit more of enjoyment with that break, because listening to the Apocalypse Rider and King Woman back to back, I can kind of see that would drag.
Ugh. Yeah, I didn't do it on purpose. I usually listen to an order, but I screwed up. And so, I was so ready for anything where they gave it gas that when this would come on, I was like, yes. And so maybe that's an interesting admission.
But it's interesting because
matters.
I did that on purpose, though, so I wouldn't have too much samesies lined up together that I couldn't differentiate between the two.
I did accidentally.
And I think it's because my hate or my dislike of the first album we did was blowing into this one. And I was like, I don't need to carry that baggage into here.
For sure. Yeah, would not be fair. So let's grade this thing.
All right. David.
I think this is a great album. Lindbergh isn't necessarily the strongest vocalist, and I think losing one of the two Bjorler brothers hurt them a bit. So I'm going to give this an A-, a great album. I probably will like it more as I listen to it more. I think it's I don't know if it's going to be my top album of the year, but it's, for me, probably I can already predict in that top 10, top 5 maybe. So for me, it's a solid A-, and I love it, and I'm here for it.
While I enjoyed the album overall, I don't think I'm as high on as you are. I think it's a good album that has some great moments in it. So I'm going to give it a B.
I'm going to come in right between the two of you. I am not quite as high on it as David, so I'm going to give it a B+ because I do think it's an excellent album. There's just something that's keeping me from putting it up into a great album. I do think that it will be in my top 10 of the year. I haven't really looked at it that closely, but just thinking about what I've listened to and how my grades have gone this year, I think it'll still fall within the top 10 at a B+. And it's got some great songs on it. This is definitely something that I'll go back to quite often. I don't know necessarily that I'll listen to the entire album, and maybe that's why I'm not giving it an A-, but there are songs that I'll pull off for sure.
I had to laugh because I'm like, I can't even guarantee it'll be in the top 25 at the moment because I've got like 60 albums already on my album of the year list.
Well, you're also a greater than him.
You're a weirdo, Tracy. Excuse me. I love you, man, but man, you have your own methods.
That's true. To the madness.
Indeed.
Madness indeed.
Speaking of madness, what are we doing next?
Next we are looking at my pick for July in Celestial Blues by King Woman.
That'll be a woman. Yeah, that'll be an interesting conversation. Another band that I've never fucking heard of.
You're welcome.
Same.
Later. All right. Well, thank you for listening to Thunderdome Metal Reviews or watching us if you happen to do that. Do all the things. You know what to do. We don't have to tell you. You're adults. Or don't do them, whatever. But we'll catch you next time.